Welcome to Obscurism, a place where I tell horror stories. Every tale here is a door, and once you open it, you'll never see the world the same way again. Spring in Kiev has a strange way of making ruins look alive. The cracked walls covered with ivy, the air carries the scent of thawed earth and rust, and the whole city hums with a kind of soft decay. That's what draws me in, the quiet, the forgotten, the stillness that speaks louder than anything else. I spend nights scrolling through old maps and abandoned forums. I'm a student, yes, but lately a place has been stuck on my mind. A city that has abandoned apartments with peeling paint and shattered glass. Its forests hold silence and stories. Urban exploration has become more than a hobby for me. It's like an obsession. This time I've set my eyes on the ghost town of Pripyat. I've been planning the trip for weeks. Satellite images, outdated bus routes, the coordinates of cracked checkpoints all marked neatly in a notebook. No tour guides, no companions. I want to see Chernobyl alone. To feel it not as a tourist but as an observer. The kind of silence I'm searching for can't be shared. Every night the map on my wall grows denser with lines and notes. A route through forests, an abandoned service road, a bridge half-sunk in moss. The forums whisper warnings about radiation zones, patrol routes, things that still move in the mist, but I read them like promises. When spring finally touched the city, I pack light, a camera, a flashlight, and a heart tuned to static. By the time morning came, I'm already on the train heading north towards the quiet heart of Chernobyl. Morning came soft and cold, the kind that makes your breath visible before the sun fully rises. I started early before anyone could notice me slipping off the road and into the tree line. My route to Pripyat was roughly 30 kilometers on foot, winding through forest trails, dirt roads, and the remains of forgotten villages. I planned to camp for the night in an abandoned village almost at the halfway mark to the city and make the final push to the city next morning. I had packed light, a flashlight, a map, a half-eaten sandwich from the train, and a single thought pulsing in my mind: don't get caught. The exclusion zone wasn't a playground for trespassers. There were patrol cars, drone sweeps, and the occasional tour bus passing through the monitored paths. If I got spotted, the whole thing would be over before it even began. I stayed close to the trees, always one glance away from open ground, ducking behind old trunks whenever I heard the distant hum of an engine. Every sound mattered. The crack of a twig, the low whistle of the wind, even my own footsteps. The deeper I went, the more the forest felt wrong. Not dangerous exactly, but quiet in a way that pressed against the ears. The kind of silence that wasn't natural. Spring had touched the land. There were wildflowers blooming through the cracks in the broken road, the scent of wet soil and budding leaves, but it all seemed filtered through a strange melancholy. Like the forest was holding its breath. Old power lines still ran beside the trail, swaying gently above the treetops. Their steel frames were half-eaten by rust, vines climbing and twisting on them. Every few kilometers I'd see the yellowed warning signs nailed to trees. Radiation, danger, do not enter. The paint had peeled, the words half faded, but they still carried weight. Ghosts of authority lingering in the woods. I passed the first graveyard around noon. The crosses were wooden, many of them rotted down to splinters, the names erased by rain and time. Some graves had no markers at all, just uneven mounds beneath the grass. A few meters away stood the remains of a small chapel, its door hanging loose, the inside filled with moss and sunlight. I didn't go in. I didn't need to. The air there was heavier, like the place remembered too much. As I moved on, the forest began to swallow the remnants of civilization. Rusted bicycles leaning against trees, the frame of an old car covered with overgrown roots and vines, an empty house with curtains still clinging to its windows. Each ruin felt like a frozen breath of the past, caught between the moment of abandonment and now. The smell of spring hung everywhere, sweet, earthy, and faintly metallic, as if the ground still carried traces of what had once poisoned it. By evening, my legs were screaming. The day's warmth had begun to fade, replaced by the slow creep of chill that came with dusk. I reached what must have once been a village. 5, maybe 6 wooden houses scattered around a dry well. The roofs were sagging, the windows long shattered. Nature had taken everything back. I decided to stop there for the night. My plan was to rest and make the final push to Pripyat tomorrow morning. Among the houses, one stood out. It still had an attic, mostly intact, with a ladder leading up through a narrow hatch. I climbed up and took the ladder in the attic with me. I brushed away the cobwebs and set down my sleeping bag near the window. From there, I could see the faint glow of the horizon, the last light slipping behind the forest. Dinner was nothing more than a pack of dried food and a bottle of lukewarm water, but it tasted like relief. My muscles loosened as I laid down, the wooden beams above me groaning softly with the wind. The house smelled of damp wood and dust. Old, but not unpleasant. I remember thinking how peaceful it was, how strange to feel safe in a place like this. I must have drifted off not long after. I woke up sometime in the middle of the night. At first I didn't know what pulled me out of sleep. The cold maybe, or a dream, but then I heard it. The sound of a door creaking open downstairs, slowly, carefully. Every sense in me froze. Something moved below. The floorboards groaned under weight, heavy weight. It wasn't the sharp sound of human footsteps. It was slower, dragging, uneven. Something large was walking through the house. I didn't dare move. My breathing slowed to shallow puffs, barely stirring the air. For a while, all I could hear was that steady rhythm of the creak of old wood, the occasional thud, and then a scrape. Something brushed against the wall. Something big. I turned my head just slightly and peered through a gap in the attic floorboards. The lower level was pitch black, but there was movement of a deeper darkness shifting against the dark. My eyes strained, trying to focus, trying to understand what I was seeing. It wasn't human. It moved too slow, too deliberate, like it was feeling its way through the room. The boards beneath it groaned. A faint shape took form, that of shoulders, a back, maybe the curve of something like antlers. I wasn't sure. All I knew was that it was tall, far too tall. Its outline shimmered in the faint moonlight that leaked through the broken window below, and for one long, suffocating moment, it turned toward the ceiling. I stopped breathing altogether. The scratching sound came again, this time against the wall just below me. Nails, claws, or something rough dragging against the wood. The noise lasted for what felt like minutes before fading. Then silence. Nothing. The only sound left was my heartbeat, hammering against my ribs. I stayed still long after the footsteps stopped, waiting, listening, barely blinking. Slowly, the stillness returned. The night air drifted back in through the cracks, and the forest outside whispered softly again. Whatever it was gone. I lay back, staring up at the roof, the pulse still loud in my ears. I tried to make sense of it. What could have wandered into an abandoned house at night in the exclusion zone? A bear, maybe. A deer. Something big, disoriented, following the scent of food. Nothing supernatural. Just an animal that didn't know better. That's what I told myself, over and over. The exhaustion of the day began to drown out the fear. My body felt like lead, my eyelids heavy. The distant rustle of leaves outside became a kind of lullaby. And somewhere between fear and fatigue, I let go. The last thing I remember before sleep took me again was the faint creak of the beams above me. Steady, rhythmic, almost like breathing. Morning crept in quietly, slipping through the cracks of the wooden roof like pale fingers of light. I hadn't slept much after what happened last night. My eyes kept darting to the attic hatch every time the wind moved the house. But eventually, exhaustion had won. Now, as the faint chorus of birds stirred outside, I climbed down from the attic, my body sore and heavy. The air inside the house was cold and damp, filled with that earthy scent of abandoned wood and rain-soaked ground. I unpacked my small camping stove and heated some instant oats and coffee. The steam curled lazily in the air, mixing with the dust motes that floated through the beams of morning light. For a while, I just sat there on the creaky floor, sipping coffee from my tin cup, trying to convince myself that what I'd heard last night was just an animal. When I finished eating, I decided to check the door. The sound of it opening had woken me in the middle of the night, and I wanted to see the marks for myself. The entrance was warped slightly from years of neglect, its hinges rusted and stiff, but what caught my attention were the deep gouges along the wood. Long, jagged scratches, carved as if something had dragged claws down its surface. I crouched closer. Each groove was thick and uneven, the edges splintered. I placed my hand against one to gauge its width. It was broader than my palm. A bear, I thought. Had to be. Maybe it smelled food and tried to get in. That explanation fit neatly enough into reason for me to accept it. I didn't linger. I packed up my gear, zipped my jacket, and left the house behind. The village was eerily calm under the spring light. Mist drifted low over the grass, and the trees swayed gently, their branches whispering against one another. The air smelled faintly metallic again, like wet iron. As I moved through the trail leading north, the forest began to thin out. The dirt paths turned into cracked asphalt, the faint remnants of an old road resurfacing. In certain stretches, chain-link fences stood crooked along the way, some half buried under vines, others slumped inward as though tired of standing guard. The radiation signs here were newer, their paint less faded, hinting that I was getting close. By afternoon, I saw it. My first glimpse of Pripyat. It appeared on the horizon like a mirage. Rows of gray apartment buildings rising above the forest, their edges softened by overgrowth and time. I stopped for a long moment, just staring. The world seemed to quiet around me. I could almost feel the weight of the silence that hung over the city, like a heavy curtain drawn across its past. I reached the outskirts by 4 in the evening. The road leading in was cracked and littered with debris. Moss had crept over the curbs, and grass sprouted through every gap in the pavement. The buildings loomed on both sides, concrete giants streaked with grime and ivy, their windows dark and hollow. A ghost city, perfectly preserved in its decay. I went inside one of the first buildings I came across. The stairwell smelled of mildew and dust. My flashlight beam danced across peeling walls, exposed wires, and old posters still clinging stubbornly to the plaster. The apartments were trashed, broken beds, shattered mirrors, torn mattresses spilling yellowed foam. Some rooms still had personal items scattered on the floor. Shoes, a child's toy, a rusted bicycle. It felt like walking into a paused moment in time, one that had never unpaused. Curiosity drove me higher, up the stairs until I reached the roof. The metal door had rusted off its hinges, and I had to push hard to move it. When I finally stepped out, I was met with an incredible sight. From the rooftop, Pripyat stretched endlessly before me. Rows upon rows of apartment buildings, standing shoulder to shoulder like silent giants. Many were so close together that it looked possible to cross from one roof to another with a careful jump. Trees had grown wild between them, their branches reaching up as if trying to reclaim what was once theirs. The streets below were overrun, sidewalks buried beneath bushes, lampposts swallowed by ivy. Beyond the city limits, the forest spread out endlessly, green and alive, pushing against the bones of human ambition. I sat there for a long time, just taking it in. The silence wasn't oppressive here. It was beautiful. It was the kind of quiet that made you feel like you were listening to the earth breathe again after a long, toxic sleep. As night fell, I stayed on the roof. I cooked a small dinner, Instant noodles and coffee again, watching the sky bleed from gold to deep indigo. Without light pollution, the stars were blindingly clear. They shimmered like frost across the heavens, sharp and cold. Far off on the edge of the horizon, I saw faint lights, the sarcophagus that covered Reactor 4. Even from miles away, it stood out, a pale, haunting monument under the starlight. For a while, I just stared at it, the faint hum of the wind in my ears. It was strange to think that such quiet beauty could exist so close to something that had once unleashed chaos. Later, I took out my phone, switching to offline maps. I needed to check my return route for tomorrow, trace my way back to the main road before heading south to Kyiv. I was zooming into a section of the map when I froze. A sound. It came from far away, but it was unmistakable. The heavy rustle of something moving through bushes. The city was utterly still, and the noise sliced through the quiet like a blade. I lifted my head, listening. There it was again. Louder this time. Something big was moving at the edge of the forest. I stood and stepped cautiously toward the edge of the roof. My heart was beating hard enough to make my fingers tremble. Below, the streets were empty, bathed in silver light from the moon. But beyond the last row of buildings, the tree line shifted. Branches swayed unnaturally, as if something was forcing its way through. And then I saw it. A shape emerged from the darkness, large, hunched, moving on all fours. At first I thought it was a bear, but as it stepped into the open, the light caught its head. It wasn't right. The snout was too long, the ears too sharp. The body looked bear-like, massive, muscular, covered in dark fur. But the head was like that of a wolf. It paused near the first apartment building, lifting its head to sniff the air. My entire body went cold. I didn't move, didn't even breathe. Then, it started walking toward the buildings. Every instinct screamed at me to run. I backed away from the edge, heart hammering against my ribs. I grabbed my backpack, slung it over my shoulder, and quietly made my way across the rooftop. The buildings were close enough for me to jump. I took a running start and leapt, landing hard on the next roof. My knees almost giving in from all the walking I did today. The sound echoed faintly, and I froze, waiting. No reaction. I kept moving, jumping from one roof to another, trying to put as much distance between myself and that thing as possible. Then I heard it again, the sound of wood splintering, glass shattering. The monster had entered the building I'd been in. I could hear it from across the roofs. A deep, guttural growl echoed through the night. The thing was rummaging through rooms, breaking furniture, its heavy steps shaking the structure. I pictured it in my mind, tearing through doors, sniffing, searching. I slipped inside the farthest apartment of the building I'd reached, crouching behind the roof entrance. My flashlight was off. I stared in the distance to the farthest apartment building from where I just ran. Minutes crawled by. Then I saw movement. The creature was climbing. Its claws dug into the concrete, pulling its massive body upward with terrifying ease. It was scaling the building, toward the roof. I turned and climbed inside the roof hatch, every nerve in my body screaming. The hallway smelled of mold and dust. I found a corner near the stairwell on the top floor, where I could see both the roof hatch and the corridor. The hatch was small, barely big enough for me to squeeze through. If that thing tried to get in, it would have to fight the size of the opening itself. I crouched there, flashlight in hand, waiting. Minutes passed. Then I heard it, the heavy thud of something landing on the roof above me. Dust rained down from the ceiling. The creature was up there, sniffing, pacing. Then came the sound of claws scraping against metal. It was trying to pry the hatch open. I aimed my light at it from a distance, but the beam barely illuminated the outline of the hatch. The scratching grew more frantic for a moment, and then a hand, or paw, or whatever it was, slid through the narrow gap. Thick, fur-covered, with claws that glinted faintly. It swiped at the air, trying to reach deeper, but couldn't fit through. My heart was pounding so loudly I thought it might give me away. I stayed motionless, muscles tensed. The thing tried again, snarling softly, frustrated. Then, after a long, agonizing moment, it stopped. The roof creaked as it moved away. I heard its footsteps recede, the faint scrape of claws on metal, and then a heavy thud. It had jumped down. Branches cracked, leaves rustled, and then nothing. The sound faded into the forest, swallowed by the darkness, leaving only the echo of its departure and my pounding heart. I didn't move for the rest of the night. I sat there in the hallway, flashlight off, clutching the thermos of powdered coffee I'd made earlier. I drank it slowly, just to stay awake. The cold air bit at my face, but it kept me sharp. I kept listening, for breathing, for footsteps, for anything. But all I heard was the wind moving through the trees outside. When dawn finally arrived, the first rays of sunlight spilling through the cracked windows, I felt my body loosen for the first time in hours. The city was still again. Whatever that thing was, it was gone. I climbed down cautiously after sunrise. My legs ached and my throat was dry. I didn't bother hiding anymore. I made my way toward the main road, waiting for the inevitable. Patrols always came through at some point during the day. It took about an hour before I saw the first vehicle. A military green-colored Jeep came slowly down the road. I stepped out of the bushes, hands raised slightly. The officers looked startled but not alarmed. They got out, asked me what the hell I was doing here. I told them the truth, that I was a student, exploring. They sighed, exchanged looks, and gave me the kind of scolding that felt half genuine, half routine. Apparently, I wasn't the first idiot to sneak into Pripyat for an adventure. They confiscated my camera, told me I was lucky they found me before I got myself hurt, or worse, and gave me a lift to the nearest town outside the zone. When I looked back from the Jeep window, the forest was already swallowing the skyline of Pripyat again. Part of me felt relief. Another part couldn't shake the image of those deep scratches, too wide, too sharp for any bear I'd ever seen.